Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Leaf Peepers Quilt Along. Today, I want to teach you how to do more simple ruler foot quilting. I'm going to use the sliced ruler and mini slide ruler to add straight lines and simple curves to our leaf blocks. So let's jump on the quilt and learn the basics of ruler foot quilting together. So now we're going to start ruler foot quilting. So this is the same technique that I used for the echo ditching. We're going to use that slice ruler again to make some cool effects, and we're also going to use the mini slide ruler. So this has some really nice gentle curves, and they are continuous if you start and stop on the points that are a 1/4 inch from the ends. So it's a really neat ruler to play with. So let's start with that curving ruler, and I've also got a ruler foot here on my machine. I'm going to drop my needle in the down position and bring it all the way back up again to the point that the needle's starting to drop back down. And that's when I pull on that top thread, brings up a loop. That's your bobbin thread. Pull it up and tuck it underneath the foot. And that just stops the bobbin thread from making a mess on the back of your quilt. Okay, so one thing to make sure of, never drop your needle down if your foot is in the up position. The reason being, that foot's really tall, and as you can see, your needle bar will crash against it. That could break your machine. So always make sure whenever you're working with this foot, your foot is in the down position. Okay, so now I've got my mini slide ruler here. We've got lots of marks on the ruler, and we've also got some marks on the quilt. And I really like to work symmetrically with these designs. So what I'm going to do here is line up the marks that is 2 from the end, 1/2 inch from the bottom, with this line of echo ditching. So that's what I'm lining it up with there. And then I'm lining up the other end and just pressing it firmly against the edge of that ruler foot. Okay, now slowly and carefully, I'm going to keep my hand pressed down on the ruler. I'm pressing down on the quilt, gliding everything through the machine at the same time. And I'm also pressing very gently on the foot pedal to run the machine at a nice steady speed. Okay, so now we're going to travel stitch back. Nice thing is you can use the flat end of the ruler, the straight end of the ruler, to do just a bit of travel stitching backwards. And I'm going to travel stitch back to the point where the edge of that ruler foot comes in line with the edge of the stitching I've just done. Now it's kind of hard to see, at least from my perspective, so I'm going to bend down just ever so slightly so I can really see what I'm doing here. I want to stitch another line 1/4 inch from the first. Cool thing about a ruler foot, it's exactly 1/2 inch across. So if the ruler is pressed up next to it and it's on the line of stitching I want to be stitching a 1/4 inch away from, my needle's in the center position, then I'm going to get that absolute perfect spacing. Okay, so there we go. We got that first 2 lines of stitching done. Now I'm going to travel stitch back again. And all I'm doing here is lining up the ruler and basically with the ditch line. I'm just basically lining up the edge of that ruler with the ditch line and then using that as a guide as I stitch backwards. I'm using that for travel stitching. It's so much more accurate. It ensures that the line is nice and straight. Okay, and sometimes you have to kind of guesstimate it. You know, I'm just guesstimating how far down that line in that direction to stitch. It looks like I overshot it a bit, so I'll just back up 1 stitch and drop my needle back in the down position. And now I can actually position the ruler on this side, just lining up the edge of that curve with that line I stitched first. So I find it sometimes a little bit easier to have the ruler in my left hand. That might be because I'm left-handed, or it might just simply because the arm of my machine is kind of small and I have a little bit more space to hold it on that side. So it could be any of those things. I don't really know which one it is, to be honest. So there we go. All right, so that looks good. Now I want to start stitching in the opposite direction. So what I'm going to do is swing the quilt around, and I basically want to stitch the same curve going this way. So how do I do that? How do I make sure that it's symmetrical? Well, when we started out, we made sure that we were here and we had that second line of stitching lined up with that echo ditching on the other side. And then down here, I made sure that my ruler foot hit that corner. So I'm just eyeballing down here in this corner and making sure that the edge of my ruler is about 1/4 inch away from that. So sometimes it's just kind of eyeballing it. You know, you don't take a ruler to it. You just eyeball it a bit. And if you get into the middle of the space and you have to tweak it a little bit left or right, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so now I'm just slowly and carefully guiding everything through the machine. You can still get big stitches. You can still get big, giant, chunky stitches because basically ruler foot quilting is a form of free motion quilting. You know, I have my settings set for the exact same thing that I use for free motion quilting. I've got my needle ending in the down position. I've got my stitch length set at 0. And I have a Queen Supreme slider here on the bed of the machine. And all of that is helping me be able to move the quilt in all different directions. And so this is basically just a form of free motion quilting. So you have to watch out for big stitches, little stitches, all that good stuff. You just have to really focus as you are making every line of quilting. Okay, so now I'm going to come down. You can see my lines are overlapping here at this point. I like that, but now I want to stop overlapping. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to stitch one more line coming up, and then I'm going to start stitching curves that come down and over. And I'm going to use that seam line right in the middle as my guide. So now I'm going to stitch over and do that one last line going this way. I should say one last curve going this way. Okay. This time I can just line up the edge of the ruler with the edge of that curve, just like so. Press up against it. And whenever you're going to move fast, whenever you know it's comfortable, the ruler's in the hand, that really feels nice, then put your foot down because you're going to move faster. There we go. Okay. So I can't really see from this perspective, but I'm going to try to leave the quilt in the same position. A lot of times people will ask me, hey, you really move your quilt around a lot. Is that normal? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes if this was a quilt that was 3 or 4 times bigger, I would probably just leave it in this exact same position and stitch backwards. I feel a little blind doing this, but I'm just going to be really careful to stop right when I get into the ditch. Right in the ditch in the middle. There we go. That's the ditch I'm looking for. And if you're looking at that going, oh man, I totally missed that, grab a marking pencil and put a line on it. Kind of color it in a little bit. This is my favorite ceramic marking pencil, and I'm just coloring that in, and that will be a guide. I'll see that and know, okay, that's the time that I need to stop and pivot the quilt around and get on track that way. Now it looks like my lines are just ever so slightly off. So in one direction, I was lined up pretty good, but on this direction, I'm kind of not. But here's the thing about ruler quilting, you can fudge it a little bit. I'm going to stitch down just a tiny bit to kind of hedge my bets, just to kind of fudge it just a bit. So I'm slightly out of the ditch, but that's okay. Now I'm going to press up against that ruler and stitch my curve in this direction. And now it should be from here on out, they should be really nicely evenly spaced. There we go. Watch out for your needle bar. You see how that's really kind of, it's huge. I think the main reason I don't like having my hand on this position and my ruler on this side is simply because that needle bar comes down and it just clocks my thumb. So that could definitely be it. So watch out for that. Keep your hand far enough away you don't get clocked. All right, so now I'm travel stitched over a bit. Now I'm going to line up my ruler again, and I'm bending over so that way I can see that it's lined up all the way along that nice curving line. Okay, and anytime I'm stitching backwards, I do slow down just a bit. It's harder to see. It does feel a little faster. Sometimes I will drag a quilt back a little bit faster, so I have to watch my speed too. Okay, I'm adjusting my ruler ever so slightly to make sure it's in the right position as I come up and hit that seam line that I marked right there. That's where I'm pivoting. Okay, now to the other side. And again, fudge it just a bit. I'm just going to back up one stitch because basically my lines just aren't coming together quite as evenly as I'd like. That's okay. My stitching will show up, but I don't think it's going to be really obvious that it's not absolutely perfectly spaced in that area. I think it will sort itself out. And here's the thing about echo quilting that I love. The more lines of echo quilting you have going into anywhere, even if it's slightly off, it still looks good. That's the cool thing about it. Okay, travel stitch up. Again, place the ruler down, line it up. So I hope you can see just how simple this is. Just trusting the curve on the ruler to do its job. And as long as you keep your ruler foot pressed nicely against it, then you're going to have really evenly spaced curves all the way throughout. Let's see if this one's going to work out nicely. Yeah, see? The edge of the ruler foot super, super close to that stitching. Really what you would be aiming for is if that line of stitching came all the way down and the edge of the ruler foot would be lining up with that edge of curving stitching going in the opposite direction. That's really what you're going for. Okay, so now I'll stitch this way. And I gotta say, doing this kind of V-shaped curve is probably the trickiest. It's even easier to do simpler curves where you're just stitching maybe curves stacking on top of one another going in one direction. And I'll show you how to do that next. I'm going to stitch just a little bit more in here and I'll show you what you do whenever you get to these pointy points. So I basically one more continuous V shape to run through this area, and I didn't show you how you can use the back of the foot. You can see here I'm kind of positioning my hands on both sides of the ruler and kind of dragging it down and to the side. Just I want to make sure that I stop and reposition right on that center point. That's how I'm making my V shape. And then now stitch this way. So there's lots of different ways that you can use the ruler foot. If your needle is in the center position, that is really the key. You just want to make sure that your needle is ending up in the center position, and then you can put your ruler to all different sides. Both sides, the back, the front, anywhere that feels comfortable, that you can get a good grip of it and be able to move it through. Okay, so now this is going to be the tricky line. I have to be really careful not to overshoot my line of echo ditching. That echo ditching is what I've been travel stitching along. So as soon as I get close to it, that's when I'm going to be careful, slow down. Okay, I've got a pocket right here, so I'm going to back up and fill that in. So travel stitch back. There we go. Reposition my ruler. Fill that in. Now, let's see here, you know, we're running out of space. I'm running off the tip of my ruler, flip it over, and the curves are identical on both sides. So here, as long as I match up that curve with the line I've done before, I'm no longer running out of ruler space. That's really nice. Okay, so I've got a long line of travel stitching, and it's kind of to the side. So I'm going to grab my slice ruler to help me out with that travel stitching, because it's just a straight line right in that echo ditching. Go all the way back. And we're stitching until this edge of the ruler foot lines up with that line of curving stitching. It might be a little ways. Actually, it's going to be all the way around to the other tip. So here we go. I'm going to rotate it. I am rotating it, but just simply so that way I can see better. There we go. And then now more travel stitching / ruler quilting all at the same time. And that does feel so much faster. Okay, now I'll grab my ruler. And this is what I was talking about. It's an identical curve on both sides. You just sometimes have to just reposition and play with the ruler a little bit to find where those curves match up. So I found right here. All you have to do is just shift it back and forth until you find where that edge lines up with the line you've previously stitched. There we go. So if you ever find yourself running off the end of a ruler and you're like, oh, it needs to be longer, just rotate it around and you've got that same curve on the opposite side. Really convenient. Okay, so just exactly the same way as before. I'm just going to keep shifting the ruler over, in this case dragging back. Careful travel stitching to get down to the next area. And if you wanted to, you could leave these little tiny points, you could leave those open. You could leave them empty and blank. Totally up to you. Okay, lifting the foot now, I'll clip those thread tails. We'll shift over to another area and I'll show you another way you can use that curving ruler in this quilt. So the V shape really is a little bit tricky. You know, you have to really make sure that you're getting that direction change nicely done. It's far easier to fill a little channel like this with just curves going in one direction. But again, you kind of want to just start off and figure out where your curve's going to go. And I kind of like the idea of the curve going right through the center. So I'm actually going to line up and put the tip of this curve right on that line of echo ditching. And it might seem a little silly that I'm doing that because, hey, this is way off the edge of that space. Why am I going so far away? Well, remember, everything is a 1/4 inch spaced with ruler foot quilting. So you're actually going to come in a lot sooner than you think. So watch out for that line of echo ditching. Once you hit it, then you know to go back to travel stitching, and we're going to kind of shift the ruler over and take a look at it. It might take a little bit of shifting and wiggling, stitching on down until you can stitch exactly, basically line up the ruler foot with that line of quilting we just stitched and be able to stitch the next line. Now you can change up your spacing, of course. You can widen your lines. You could do 1/2 inch spacing. You could do 1/4 inch, then 1/2 inch spacing. You know, you can play all around with that. Because these spaces are relatively small, I like to fill them up with a little bit more stitching, simply so that way you see the design, you get to see that texture. I feel like if I space my lines out a lot more than that, then you'd start to lose the texture. But it's totally up to you. You know, if you want to just get a taste of ruler quilting, but without having a lot of time commitment, then 1 or 2 lines will be perfectly fine. I gotta say the trickiest line is whenever you're going backwards, because you just really, you know, it's hard to see. And the key with that is get it lined up. You know, reposition your body, kind of lean forward, make sure you've got it lined up nicely, and then just press down as you drag the quilt, the ruler, everything back through the arm of the machine. Oops, right there, I hit some echo ditching. I ran out of space. So now I'm going to travel stitch down, reposition my ruler, and finish off that little curve. Now I left a little pocket here. I'm going to travel stitch down and go on ahead and fill that. So what if you only had the mini slide ruler? Well, you could just use that straight edge to do that echo ditching or travel stitching all the way down. So I'm just lining up that straight edge until, and I'm just looking, I'm looking visually on the edge of that ruler foot until it's lined up with that line of stitching I just did. And then once it is, I just reposition the ruler and I finish it off, just like that. Okay, now let's switch to the slice ruler, and check out what we can do with that. So now I'm going to fill this space with evenly spaced straight lines using the slice ruler, and this is the time when you want to figure out what hand you like your ruler in. If you like your ruler in your right hand, you would get started going on this side. If you like your ruler in your left hand, you could get started on this side. So always pay attention to that and just notice whenever you have a choice. Sometimes you don't. You know, sometimes you're just kind of stuck with whatever position your quilt's in, and you're stuck in whatever position you're kind of required to stitch it in because of the design. But sometimes, you know, when you're paying attention to it and you have a choice, definitely put your ruler in your dominant hand or the hand that feels most comfortable. So here I'm pressing firmly and guiding the whole quilt through the arm of the machine. And again, I'm going to get to that center seam line, and that's where I'm going to pivot, change direction. So you can visually see I'm in the center of the seam line. The edge of that stitching is also right in line with the edge of the ruler foot as well. Now I'm going to try this positioning. This isn't my favorite, I'll be completely honest. It feels just a little freaky. And as you can see, I tend to drag it faster because I want to get through it really quick. It feels uncomfortable, so let's do it fast. So yeah, it feels a little awkward, but you know, obviously you can do it. You can stitch that way. You can stitch in all different directions. Okay, so this is one of those things. Sometimes you'll end up with an area that is perfectly spaced and will work out just great for all 1/4 inch lines. Sometimes it won't work out that way, and I'm not so sure that if I stitched another 1/4 inch line, I'd have space, a nice even spacing for that last line. So instead of doing it that way, I'm going to stitch one line to one side and then one line to the other side. So if I have a slightly weird channel, it will end up in the middle. And that, for some reason, usually looks better than having it stitched to the upper side or the lower side. Put the weirdness in the middle. I don't know why, but that feels like a lesson for life. There we go. So again, I'm trying that awkward angle. Not the best at it, but that's okay. Oh, my machine doesn't seem to like it either. I had a little skip stitch there. When your machine gives you a problem, that lets you know, yeah, you're probably going to have to reposition a little bit and try a different angle. We have this idea that you can stitch in all different directions with free motion quilting, and the simple fact of the matter is it really just depends on what your machine likes. If your machine doesn't like it, then you're going to have to move things around and shift it. And, you know, get it so that way you don't skip stitches or break thread. There we go. Finishing that off. So let's see. Yeah, it's actually pretty perfect. I have a 1/4 inch spacing to give me a full 1/2 inch right there. So I have a full 1/2 inch, but you know what? I actually really like the way that looks, so I'm going to stop there. That's just 2 lines added. It adds a nice texture. It leaves a little bit of an open space, but I think that looks great. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning more about ruler foot quilting and you're excited about giving this a try. Now, just in case you don't have a ruler foot or these rulers, that's okay. You can always mark the designs on your quilt and stitch it with walking foot quilting or free motion quilting. That works great too. Now, speaking of walking foot quilting, that is what Sherry is using to quilt her quilt. So make sure to go and check out her video. She's going to be sharing at wholecirclestudio.com. Now, if you'd like to join in the fun and make the Leaf Peepers quilt with us, all you're going to need is a copy of the quilt pattern. You can find it at leahday.com/leaf. And you can join in this quilt along anytime and work at your own pace. So please join in and start working on your leaf blocks to celebrate this beautiful fall season. Check it out at leahday.com/leaf. Until next time, let's go quilt.